In the next two episodes of Odessa After Dark, we are lucky enough to travel to Books in the Basin, where we got to speak to three of the authors there at Midland College. In this episode, we get to speak to Bill Wright. His latest book is Authentic Texas, People of the Big Bend.
I was really surprised one day to get a call from the State Department saying, we can't officially invite you to Afghanistan because it's a war zone, but should you happen to be in the area, that we'd wonder if you'd like to stop by and spend about a week teaching digital photography to Afghan young people that through a nonprofit organization there in Kabul called Ascensia, A-S-C-H-I-A-N-A. I guess that's how you pronounce it. And I've always wanted to go to Afghanistan. It's been on my bucket list, you know.
Oh, really?
So it took me about 10 seconds to decide I'd like to do that. And then we got together enough money to buy digital cameras for the school and headed out. Took some supplies, and the State Department bought the digital lab for them, and had 13 official students and others that just decided to come in and sit in on the class, which was great. And we had a wonderful time. And so this book, and I have a copy of it if you'd like to see it. The book is really just an e-book. It wasn't published really in a hard cover. And the reason was because I wanted the kids over there to have a chance to see it. It's not my work, it's their photographs.
Oh, wow.
As a result of their class. And so that's the story in a nutshell.
What city in Afghanistan?
Kabul.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This school is very interesting. They got started taking street kids off of the street, kids that were making money for their families by wiping windshields for tips and selling bubble gum and things like that, And they'd take these kids and pay their families the equivalent amount of money that they would be able to average bringing home. And then when they got them in the school, well, they would teach them crafts and things that they could use to make a better line of money, than just what they could essentially beg. And some really marvelous artists developed out of this, and they taught them languages, and they taught them, I'm sure, a lot of things. I just was involved in the photography end, and it was just amazing how these kids were after it. I say kids, the oldest in the class was 26 and the youngest was 12. It worked out quite well because it was like the old-fashioned classroom. The older kids helped the younger ones, and I had an interpreter that I took with, that I arranged for there, that I took with me into the classroom, and he was able to help me communicate. And then there was a great gal from Australia that whose husband was over there on a World Bank deal or something of that nature, a consultant, economic consultant. She was just doing volunteer work, and so she was a great help. They assigned her to me, and so that was the project, and that was the basis of the book. I was just wanting to have a chance and a vehicle to show not only the kids their own work in an international setting, but to show the American people, that the Afghan people are pretty great people. And, there's
how are, because they've been from one war to another war to another war, so is it like a whole different level of normal? Because, here they are taking a photography class with you.
Yeah. Well, and this was in a period when it was relatively calm in Kabul. Of course, I say that. A bomb went off on the main street, and another bomb went off near the embassy while I was there. But, it's sort of like a fire in lower Manhattan, and you're up at the other end, and people adjust to that kind of tension. And these kids, though, in my book, I didn't give their names because I knew and feel like that when the Taliban take back over, which it appears they're going to do, maybe not now that there's been a little bit of a change in their administration, but they'd kill them. Half the class was women, and they weren't there. They had on appropriate clothing, but it was an amazing experience. But those kids were after it, and I say kids, they're young men and women there, and their parents. Or often there was only one parent, or maybe they were injured in the war, or missing a leg, or something of that nature, and they were more traditional. They didn't want them photographing at home. One of my assignments was to go home and photograph your family and your house and your surroundings and tell the story. I wanted them to tell the American people what their life was like, and they came back without that. The parents wouldn't let them. In fact, the parents didn't even want them going to school.
Is that because of the Muslim belief of? Yeah.
Well, and not only that, they felt that women should not be educated at all. In fact, one of the students that was there had to run away from home, from a tribal area, and he said that if he didn't grow a beard the length of his fist, that if he went home to see his parents, then the Taliban would kill him.
Oh, wow.
It's hard for an American to believe that.
Well, let me ask you, you mentioned that Afghanistan was on your bucket list. Why? A lot of people would look at that situation and be like, well, thanks, but no thanks. And what made you want to do that?
Of course, I didn't want to go in the middle of a war. But, Afghanistan is an incredible country. It's just beautiful. And the mountains there, the Hindu Kush, right on the edge of some of the tallest and finest mountaineering in the world. So it was a place I've always wanted to go.
After looking over your books and your photography, you seem more of and you mentioned it, more of a storyteller than an actual author. So you get into a subject and you find everything out about it, and then it's almost like you're reporting on it. Do you see yourself as a storyteller?
Absolutely. Most people in their life don't have a biography written of them. The best they can hope for maybe is a good obituary. And it's been said by numerous people that everybody has a story. And certainly in this Big Bend book, my partner and I interviewed over 50 people down in the Big Bend area of Texas. And small towns like Valentine, Marathon, and we met some just incredible people. And and we purposely didn't, go to the rich and famous. We didn't do the Chinati Foundation and some of the better known locations. because other people have done that. But I wanted to show that there's really a different character to the people, I think, in that part of Texas. I think I would like to think maybe there are remnants of the fortitude and the courage and the toughness that those original colonists exhibited when they followed Stephen F. Austin into this country. No development at all, just Indians, and they weren't friendly. It took a lot of courage. And these people, I don't want to make too much of it, but I mean, they're 150 miles from the nearest Walmart. I mean, you have to be somewhat self-reliant to live in that kind of an environment. But let me tell you, they love it.
Well, it brings a question up that we were going to talk about later, but I'll talk about it now because you're talking about the Big Bend. And so you were even doing like some historical research on Maggie Smith.
Right. Do you know Maggie Smith?
I didn't until I now know she. I read an interesting story that she ran an outpost and that she was involved in the wax trade.
Oh.
Never even knew there was a wax trade, and that she used to
yeah.
hide it in the women's restroom because they wouldn't go into the women's restroom.
Right.
But how do you do research on a character like this, and how?
Well,
why did you pick her?
Obviously, it's difficult because she died in 1965, and a lot of her family is gone, and there's cousins and things of that nature that I've been able to get some historic photographs from. But I've gone back to her great-grandfather, who founded the city of Carrizo Springs, and was a rancher there and followed. It came on through to her father that was murdered in Mexico. I mean, I believe that there's a lot to a person's forebears that determine sort of their route in life. I mean, her folks were tough people. And now she had to be tough to live down there on the river. And she was highly respected. The people in the wax trade, she would go out at night, midnight, by the dark, with $5,000-6,000 of cash, and pay these wax runners. Well, it wasn't illegal to bring it into the United States. It was illegal to take it out of Mexico, and so these collectors would take the wax and they would render it down into a rough form that they could break up and dry and put in tow sacks and load on burros, and they'd come across the river at night. Now, the park people didn't like that because it was illegal for them to take it through the park, but they would run it through the park and back up to Marathon and Alpine, where they would legally refine it and put it on the trains in New York. But they use that wax for the coating of M&Ms and fingernail polish and like cosmoline to put on bullets and stuff like that. So it's the whole story. It's a fascinating story.
Would you say she's an influential person for that area?
Well, I mean, she had everybody's respect. It was sort of like Hallie Stillwell, who was another really wonderful story down there about how she was able to survive in that environment. Went down as a school teacher, and her father was, that's another story, but Hallie is another, and there's others. I mean, it's a place that's, just riddled with wonderful characters.
Well, is there any story that you necessarily want to tell? Going back to your bucket list, is there a story there that you really, really want to tell that you haven't told yet?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, you've got plenty. I'd like to. Occasionally I've been working on a photographic story of the life of Estevanico. Estevanico is the black slave that accompanied Cabeza de Vaca. And he was born in, or we think he first came into history in Azamur, Morocco, and became a slave of the Spanish that were on the Narvaez expedition to Florida. There have been a couple of books written about him, but I was over there photographing. I went to Morocco, photographed in that town, and in Spain where he was, photographed Cuba. I went to Cuba just a few years back, and that's a story.
Yes. Did you pretend to be Canadian, or?
Well, no. The story there was getting the permission to go, but the day before, and I won't go into all of it, but it's a pretty good story.
It's a pretty place. Let's talk about one of your first books, because you actually started out having your own business and then went into photography and after you sold your business. So this is like your second life, and then you spent, like, if I'm correct, 6 years with the Tuanguas Pueblo Indians of Texas.
Well, I didn't spend 6 years living with them, but I would go from Abilene over a period of 6 years and photographed them, and that was actually my first book. It was published by Texas Western Press, and it's very coincidental that the editor for Texas Western Press was my co-author on this last book.
Oh, okay.
So
that's neat.
Yeah, we have. Her name is Marcia Dodestal, and she is an incredible person. I mean, and she really is a wonderful interviewer too. I mean, she just as you. I think she has the ability to draw people out and gain their confidence. And we had some amazing stories. And
Well, especially that tribe, I mean, they have a real, because they weren't even recognized as a tribe for the
Right.
longest time. So, I mean, there's a real long, horrible history. And, I mean, how are they now compared to, because they're living basically in El Paso, and they're recognized, but, I mean.
Well, it's very interesting, and they had a tough time because they were even persecuted more than the Mexicans, and so they abandoned their language, their Kiowa language, that they are just now trying to revitalize, or were when I was doing the work with them, and just began to speak Spanish, and they were pretty well passed off as Spanish, Mexican later. But the time frame that I did that book was up until they got a casino, and that basically changed everything, and that caused a big division in the tribe. A bunch of them didn't want the casino because they recognized that it would be a watershed type thing, But then they lost their casino because when they agreed to be recognized as a tribe, it was widely believed the only reason they wanted to do it was so they could have a casino. And they promised they would not have gambling if they went ahead and recognized them as a tribe. So it's very interesting that they were shut down on their casino, where other tribes, the Kickapoo that I later with, and the Alabama, I'm not sure if the Alabamas have it, but basically the other thing that helped them was the lottery, Texas lottery. So, and trust is an amazing thing, and if you don't have it, you never know what you're getting, because a lot of times, like they were telling me, they said, we sure have pulled some spoofs on people, just people coming down to talk to us, telling them wild stories that didn't have any basis in truth. And
I
they
like
were
that
laughing,
idea.
one of the funniest things, I took several of them up to the museum up in I went with them on their summer trip when they went up to do farm work, migrant work. And we decided to go on over to the museum in Cody, the Buffalo Bill Museum. And as we passed along, they're always kidding me, being Anglo white with all these Indians. And we saw some antelope out there, And they said, we call you, you know what we call you? And we call you the name for antelope. And I said, why antelope? And he said, because you have a white butt. I just cracked up, but they wouldn't have done that if they didn't trust me.
Right.
And I think that the same thing is true with West Texas people, out in the Big Bend. Those ranchers, Ike, he is a fabulous guy. His wife, Sue, is from the UK, from Britain. Their daughter makes the absolute best goat cheese I have ever eaten. And, but they're low key. You don't really see them out advertising themselves or anything. They have some great stories. But it was a privilege for me to be able to make all these relationships. And, and then too, I think that this is something I might want to say when I give a little talk here after a while. I really think that the quality of a person's relationships determines the quality of their life. And when you think about that, and I'm talking about relationships in the largest sense, the large relationship with your family, your existential feelings, your relationship with the land, and that is so important in West Texas and in that particular part of West Texas. So so many people come and they step off of a train that goes through Alpine, step off the interstate to get gas, get a flat fixed. They see that country and they just decide to look at it a little more and they stay. It's amazing how many people we interviewed came and stayed when they never intended to.
Well, can you tell me one more time the name of the recent book, the one that you're talking about in the Big Bend?
Authentic Texas, People of the Big Bend.
So this was our conversation with Bill Wright. You can find his books available on Amazon, and the ebook is under
Wings Press.
Thank you, Wings Press.